So, Happy New Year, everybody. It is the second day of December 2024, and today's topic is why the sex stings are bad. Well, we want to emphasize, first of all, that we've talked about a lot of terminology over the past year, proactive versus reactive. We're talking about exclusively what some people in the know call trolling or proactive stings. In other words, police don't have a lead, they don't have a suspect, they don't have a reason necessarily. But what they do is they hang out in social media sites, gaming sites, dating sites, hookup sites, specialty sites, and they look for opportunities, not for criminals, to exploit a situation in order to create a crime around people. It is a form of pretextual policing, whereby what the police do is start with an assumption, and the assumption is that there are offenders. And then when they make arrests based on approaching the person, claiming to be an adult, switching it to a child, getting the conversation going, and suggesting sex, often they're the first to do that, trying to put the person who wasn't in a dating site for adults for children, trying to put that person into a position where they appear to be interested in children, or make it a virtue test where the person says, well, maybe a kid wouldn't be so bad, if you're kind of making it okay. And in effect, pimping children, making it more dangerous for children in some respects, putting more resources into creating an environment where people who might want to harm children could find safe haven. That's essentially what they're doing. And that is one of the reasons it's wrong. So the first one is certainly the first reason is it intrudes on sensitive areas of human life. When humans go on to a sex site, a dating site, any social media site, really, a gaming site, and they start sharing personal information, that's a very vulnerable time for people. It's not necessarily a terrible time, it's not necessarily inherently dangerous, but the police make it more dangerous by the games they play. Again, what do police claim they do? They go on these sites, they sit there like this, and they just see what happens. And that's not what's actually happening at all. What police are doing is actively engaging people and luring them along and subjecting them to virtue tests and asking if they're interested in these things. And even after they're told no, even after they're told, no, I'm not interested, they do not cease and desist and go on to somebody else. They keep pushing and pushing and pushing. What they tell people is that these are techniques that they have learned to use where they can ferret out the bad guys. But we don't know that that's actually true in every case. We don't know if it's true in this case because we have to take the police word for it. How do we know that it's not trolling or creating a situation or trying to put people in a compromising position in order to meet their own goals? So, the first point, it intrudes on sensitive areas of human life, is not just that. It also violates constitutional principles. First Amendment allows you to speak your mind. First Amendment actually allows, as in the Ashcroft v. Free Speech Coalition of, I think, 1992 maybe, child erotica. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it's there. It's allowed. You can possess child erotica. You can write it. You can read it. Okay. It's part of the First Amendment, by the way. The Fifth Amendment also it impinges upon, as well as the 14th, and liberty interest in speaking your mind and in conducting your affairs, and without there being a law against it. And of course, what police will say is, well, there's no law against having sex, or there's no allowance, excuse me, and is a law or more than one law that does not allow you to have sex with children. Fair enough. But that's, again, beside the point. because police are on there, they claim, to rescue children when they don't have any children in mind. They have no tip, they have nothing. And as soon as you're in that situation where police might be wasting their time, where there are certain requirements that have to be met, where they have grant money, where they have to come up with statistics, there's an awful lot of pressure to make something happen or to create an occurrence or to have an occurrence happen. And what if it doesn't? Well, increasingly, police are pushing and pushing to create that happening. So it intrudes on one of the most sensitive and vulnerable areas of a person's life. It contravenes the Constitution of the United States and specific amendments. And it's just not good police practice. It begs the question, what do you want your police to do? If the idea is, as the police say, we want to arrest these things, we want to stop this before it happens, they're not really doing that. They're creating statistics because when they arrest somebody, they say, we arrested so many offenders. Okay, these people didn't even get a day in court and they're already being called offenders. In Virginia last year, we passed a law making it illegal to post for retired police officers their address, their phone number, where they live, identifying information. Why? Because we recognize it might endanger them. And yet, we don't recognize that it endangers people's lives online. We don't recognize that people have other privacies and other liberties as well online. We don't recognize that. We use this very squishy standard police will use that, well, we want to catch them before it happens. Well, if you really want to do that, why aren't you going, as I said, every eighth house and kicking in the door and doing a thorough sweep and investigation? Because you might find tax cheats, you might find people in the process of molesting somebody, you might find an argument in a family member, you might find that they're spanking their child, these parents. You never know what you might find. But of course, that would be a gross, monstrous violation of the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment, wouldn't it? And yet, here we are in the digital age, in the age of high tech stuff, and we are allowing this to happen routinely. And it is netting people who are suffering from dementia, people who are just, trying to make a social connection because they're awkward, people who express themselves through a gaming platform, the intellectually disabled who, like my daughter, who's autistic, who doesn't have very good social skills, despite every effort to try to teach her and train her in ways where she can be more normalized in society. These are the people that are also being netted in this, folks. It's not just that, it's people like me who are just thought they were helping somebody who they weren't searching for. This person was dropped in their lap, looked, presented to them in a certain way, and they said repeatedly, as I did, I'm not interested. This is what it's doing. So that's the first point, why they should be stopped. The second point is that the intrusion is part of a broader intrusion that we're not only not understanding, but we're actually embracing in some ways, even as in other ways we're pushing it away, and that is privacy. It begs the question, how much privacy under law are you allowed? Like the first principle I said, intrusion into sensitive areas are constitutionally protected. Privacy should be, but the courts have eroded that over the years. Um, but it really begs the question. We have all this data online. We have our medical records. We have our personal records, our tax records. We have sensitive information of our name, address, phone number, social security number, date of birth, all this sort of stuff, some of which you have to put in to access dating sites, social media sites, entertainment sites. Okay. Who owns that data? Who's running that data? It's a handful of companies run by very wealthy people and their investors. These are the people running the country, and in a very, very real way. Okay. Google and Apple. I mean, I'm using a YouTube platform run by one of these companies. right? They're all extraordinarily powerful. So who owns our data? Who owns this stuff? If we don't own our person, it comes down to almost owning our person, our physical body, owning everything else about us. It's an important thing to keep in mind. They're violating our privacy laws. And if we don't have strong enough privacy laws, because the courts certainly have rolled over for privacy, saying you have no expectation of privacy in a public setting. In a digital world, all of it's a public setting, isn't it? Where does public end and private start? Where are the walls of the public square? Well, we haven't really dealt with that in a meaningful way. We're starting to. Virginia started opening up uh, the thought to synthetic media laws, and if you create fakes, you should be penalized for it. We already have that if you do revenge porn and things of that sort. But we don't have a robust, muscular, real focused strategy on trying to protect our data, our privacy as well as exemplified in code. And we need to have that. That's another reason that Sting shouldn't be allowed. We haven't worked that out yet. We haven't worked out what they expose us to, not to mention the stigmata that they put us through. We haven't worked that out. We don't have any areas of the world where we are really seriously addressing those concerns. We're allowing police to stumble around in there where they don't really belong. That brings us to the next point. Companion point is failure to act grants government agents undue rights. We've seen over and over again that unless the police have guardrails put on by local governments through the citizenry or through the courts, they will push the envelope as far as they possibly can. Remember, they're made up of people, these police departments, and police love having the public on their side. And nothing gets you on your side more than to point to a common enemy and say, we're cleaning up the streets from that guy. And that's what they do. That's why they get grant money. That's why the money helps to fuel the sex offender registries in every state. Millions and millions and millions of dollars are spent on these things. Then you have the prison industrial complex, and you have all the vendors who uh, allow you to pay exorbitant fees just to make a damn phone call or to get needed things like long underwear for the cold conditions inside the prison, or even some goodies or some vitamins or a toothbrush. Now, these are things that are not given to you. You have to pay for those, not to mention the daily rate that you have to pay. So it supports the notion that the police are above the law, that they can skirt right on the edge at the very least, and that it implies rules and expresses the rules that are really not in the Constitution, elements of the law that really aren't in there because we have supposedly the Constitution protecting us. But if the courts have allowed them to get away with it, or they make the argument to the community, hey, we're trying to curb child predation. That's where we're trying. Child exploitation is out of control, and that's why we're on these sites. The public's likely to say, "Oh, okay, that seems reasonable," well, but the public doesn't ask the next question: how are you doing that? Show us what you're doing. And in fact, when the public tries to get in the business of the police, which is really all of our business, the police push back and say, this is an investigation. We don't want sources and methods. We don't want to give up what we're doing, which is just a cover for non democratic, jackboot thug policery. Really. I mean, thuggery of the police. I mean, it's hard to view it any other way. And even though, yes, there are certainly times where the police need to have security and they can't let the public know about everything, the public needs to be much more engaged in what's going on. And by exceeding these rights, by failing to act in this, by saying, well, this is somebody else's problem, Joe Q public, what you're doing is you're creating an environment where eventually you're going to get caught up in it. You're giving the police more reign than they should have. They want guardrails too, right? Don't they want to know exactly what they can do that will not result in a lawsuit or a challenge to their qualified immunity? Don't they want to know really what makes sense? The fourth principle, and the reason why the stings need to go, is that there's really no guardrails at all. The last point I mentioned was guardrails. I said it grants them so many rights. Well, companion with that is there are no guardrails set. And until there are really meaningful guardrails. Now again, the counter to this is, oh, there are guardrails, they have to get warrants and they have, yes, yes. But they found ways around all these guardrails. Right? We know that they can tunnel into computers and find things and then go get an affidavit in support of a warrant to locate what they've already located. Well, that's very convenient, isn't it? And you don't have to believe me, plenty of information out there on there, plenty of research on there, plenty of books written on there, and I've highlighted some of them here. We also say, well, what they need to do is they need to have uh, enough flexibility to meet the growing problem of predation. They do, but why can't there be guardrails too? If you had the public informed more, maybe that would be more helpful. Maybe we would avoid some of these things. Maybe the public would have greater impact and input into what's going on with these things. And finally, the fifth one, which I'm pouring myself into too, the fifth reason why the stings need to go away is they mislead the public. They mislead the public with disinformation. This is the most insidious thing. They tell the public that average and ordinary citizens, if given a chance, will violate every norm of society and rape, pillage, and plunder innocent children. And that's just not true. Over and over again, we found that while it is true that some people will do this, and some of them have badges, as we know from the Washington Post article and many, many others, the Henry Wallace um, database of police misconduct, including through computer solicitation, we know that they tell the public all the time in subtle ways that the public is in danger and that people like me are the danger. And they go out and they do it in a variety of ways. One of the ways that they do it is through just their use of terminology. They talk about scum, they talk about, excuse me, disgusting people out there, sodomites, I read in one article. They talk about how people are offenders before they get a day in court. They breathlessly rush a press release out there claiming that people did something that they didn't do. And you can't fight this, by the way. Remember, you can't, there's no way to fight it because you need to keep your powder dry because you are in the defense right now. And anything you say can and will be used against you. And remember, the prosecution has nearly all the cards. So it also tells the public that the problem is here. And it doesn't really inform the public that the problem is on the deep and dark web. The problem is in the bathhouses, perhaps. The problem is elsewhere. Um, but more than that, it also creates the stigma that even if you are among those who have done something or would seek to, or even without being solicited by the police, you say, yes, I would be interested in doing this. What you're doing is not having any avenue to ever get off of that. There's no mechanism in Virginia, for example, to get off the sex offender registry before 15 years. No mechanism at all. So if you've been erroneously put onto the registry, no way to get off of it. And that is a stigma that is perpetual and ongoing, continual, and affects every aspect of your life. So those are the five different ways that the stings damage society, damage life, damage everyday ordinary people, and they need to be addressed. They are again intruding on sensitive areas of life and violating the constitutional principles that we are supposed to be founded on. Secondly, that it calls into question a variety of privacy abuses and uses that are not covered so much under law, and really leads to a problem of who owns your own privacy, which is also guaranteed under the Constitution. It grants certain rights and privileges to police that are implied nowhere in the Constitution or explicitly listed nowhere in the Constitution, which the police will use to push the envelope as far as they can. It sets no democratic guardrails. There's no democratic institutions that are involved in regulating the police or talking to them and saying, "Well, this is really a sensitive area. Let's work out some guardrails." None of that in there. And the fifth one is it terribly misleads the public into thinking that there's more fear and apprehension that should be applied, and that the police should be given more and more authority to do more and more things. And that's why they're now allied with vigilante groups who have been deputized in a very real way to go out hunting for so called pedophiles. And again, this is not to say that real harm isn't being done on children, but let's talk about the harm being done on adults too. And that is not a zero sum game. It's not an either. Let me try that again. It's not a zero sum game. It's not an either or kind of thing. Okay? You don't need to sacrifice adult lives by claiming you're trying to curb child predation. You don't need to do that. You can do both. And that's what we've argued repeatedly on there. And until such time as the police can rein in their methods, certainly the so-called sex stings, whether they're proactive or whatever word you want to use, they should cease immediately. This is Norman Michaelation. Let me know what you feel in the comments section. Please like and subscribe. We're going to try to do more of these in the coming year, and I look forward to talking to you soon.